Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this KState Town Hall for faculty and staff. On the panel today, helping with making some comments and then helping with questions that we may get are Chuck Tabor, our provost, and Jay Stevens, Human Capital Services. And there are others from the administration and that can help if they need to, but those are the primary panelists. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about why we're here today. Provide an overview of the budgetary actions that have been taken across the university. You all know why we're doing this. We're in unprecedented times. We have the pandemic, the disease that is still not, I don't think, totally understood. We have the economic impact from the disease. So we have financial impacts to most families across this country. And then, of course, we have the social injustice issues that have come really gained a lot of momentum after George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. So all of that swirling, not to mention what it already is a fairly divisive election year for candidates for national and state office. So I wouldn't call it a perfect storm, but I don't know that anybody has lived through anything quite like this and the impact it's having on us. So obviously it's had a huge impact on the state and consequently on state agencies, of which Kansas State University is one. So this is an overview of some of the budgetary actions being taken across the university that impacts virtually all of us. There's nobody untouched. We certainly want to share information about the administrative furlough plans for fiscal year 21, which we're now a few days into, and next steps. And most importantly, we want to answer your questions. And if we can't answer them, we're going to find somebody who can. Now, let me remind you what our guiding principles were when we went into this crisis. Next slide. So when we decided to ask our students not to come back after spring break, I think that was on March 12th, we very quickly, as we started to make decisions, developed guiding principles that we would live by as we figured out how we're going to continue people's education, how we're continue our research and our outreach. And you can read them there, but the first one is always the most important, and that's to preserve the health and safety of our university community and also our host communities in Salina and in Olathe, Kansas. And then, of course, we want to maintain and deliver our land-grant mission, do all the things that we exist for, the teaching, the research, extension, outreach. And we can be pretty proud that while it was not a perfect graduation by anybody's estimate, we did graduate over 3,000 students this spring. So we were able to deliver on that mission promise. And then we wanted, of course, preserve and maintain our operations necessary to support the mission. Equally important is to preserve our financial capability of the university to deliver the mission so we could enjoy long-term fiscal health. We have, as people probably understand it, just like families, we have debt to service, and to service debt, you need cash. And so we looked at that early on, especially with some of those entities that relied on income from customers to make payroll. And those were some of the early moves we made in terms of those employees. And then finally, when we did all this, we didn't want to destroy our K-State culture. We have a great culture here of collaboration, of working together, of finding our way through challenges. And I think to date, we've done a really good job of that. I'll just point out one thing I think that's helped in that regard is it was the University Foundation, Kansas State University Foundation, that came up with the idea of a K-State Strong Fund for employees who might need some extra money to get them through the tough times of being furloughed and so forth. That fund raised, I think, nearly $500,000. The checks are still going out. It's a very easy application process, and it was trying to keep our trying to help our K-State family, especially for those that are among the lowest wage earners. So now let me, with those guiding principles in mind, let me introduce our Provost, Chuck Tabor, who will take us through some of the budget and financial issues.
Thank you, President Myers. As the President said, we're facing collectively a set of challenges that we've never faced before, and it's leading us to take actions that we have not needed to take before. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes and go over what the nature of the financial challenges are that we're facing. We have estimated that since we had to go to remote operations in March, that we've lost about $48 million in revenue. That's between lost revenue and increased operating costs. In addition, we're expecting at least $37 million of loss in this fiscal year that we've just entered. And that's due to the continuing impacts of the public health crisis that we're in. It's due to the continuing declining enrollment that we are, as you know, we're taking a lot of steps, a lot of actions to try to address that. But with COVID, we do anticipate that we'll have continuing declining enrollments. And then a very unknown state funding picture. We really don't know what will happen. Our state is also facing some significant fiscal challenges, and we're not sure how that will impact us. So our budget projections could worsen, and it's important to keep that in mind. It could get worse during the course of this coming fiscal year. Next slide, please. Can you go back one? Thank you. So the deans and in our budget process here, and this is not new, this has been the case for a decade or more. Our process has been that each year our deans and vice presidents develop their budget plans. In years where there's a reduction in our overall university budget, that means that they have to find ways to reduce their budgets. And so they're given targets, budgetary targets within all of our units, and they make decisions about what kinds of actions, what kinds of levers they're going to pull in order to close their budget gaps. So we've always had a decentralized model. Now, as you know, we've adopted an RCM style or RCM hybrid model for our budgeting process, and that is also a decentralized approach. So we're continuing in that mode. On this slide, I list just a few of the key levers that various units have taken other than the furloughs that we're focusing on today. We thought it would be important for you to see some of the other actions. I'm not going to go through this in any detail. I'll just call out several of the largest dollar amounts here. The elimination of vacant positions was the largest dollar amount on this slide for levers. Cutting operating expenses, using cash balances and backfilling. So several of these are sort of temporary measures designed to bridge us to the coming year. And in many ways, that's what furloughs are as well. Let's move on to the next slide. So among these budget levers were two different types of furloughs that unit leaders could choose between. And it's really important that we understand the difference between these, because these different types of furloughs are used for different purposes, and they have different processes that we follow for them. The first type are the emergency furloughs. These occur when there's some kind of an emergency, when there's an immediate, imminent lack of funding to a unit, and we need to take a significant budget step in order to keep that unit functioning during this difficult emergency time. And as I think you probably know, we have in fact already done some emergency furloughs at the university, targeted on several of our units that did not have fee revenue coming in that was critical to their ongoing operations. So on this slide, you see that to date, we've had 430 employees who have been emergency furloughed, and that has saved an estimated $2.75 million. Next slide, please. So the other type of furlough, which is the one we're focusing on today, are administrative furloughs. These furloughs are designed or planned for short-term actions that might last for the course of a year or less, but are not intended to be extended over any period of time. And they're planned budget actions that the university takes and that go through a process of consultation with shared governance, with faculty and staff leadership, so that we have an opportunity to discuss these things as a university as a whole. What we did in order to pursue this is we provided some guidelines or some guideposts for our deans and vice presidents in setting up these administrative furloughs. And these were built on some guidance that was drafted in 2017 between the administration and shared governance. So we started with that already established guidance about how administrative furloughs should be, and then we went on from there. We required that critical services, the safety of students, employees, and university assets have to be protected. It cannot result, these administrative furloughs cannot be designed in order to cancel classes. They cannot lead to lack of compliance with our external obligations to funding agencies. And they require that they be clearly documented, that those who will be exempt from the furlough, and there are a number of categories of folks that are exempted from furloughs, that they are clearly documented. We provided also a standard 6-tier salary structure. Go to the next slide and we'll talk about that. Yeah. So the 6-tier salary structure was designed to provide some common thresholds for salary levels for all of our unit leaders to use as they designed and planned furlough actions. So everybody used the same set of salary tiers that you see here. So we divided our employees into those who made less than 50,000, 49,999 or less, between 50 and 75,000, between 75 and 100,000, between 100 and 150,000, and 150,000 and 200,000, and above 200,000. These tiers allow us to have some fine grained actions in terms of our furloughs. It also provides flexibility to our unit leaders who face very different budget situations. So the budget situations in one part of the university is different from those in another part of the university. And in addition, the nature of the job, the workforce is very different in different parts of the university. So a one-size-fits-all was not going to work for us. And so we decided to go with this approach. We provided these guidelines, but we also provided flexibility, as you see here. We also used a standard calculation to convert furlough days before 12 and 9 months so that we would be fair in the way furloughs would impact our 12 and our 9-month employees. So I believe if you go to the next slide, I believe that Jay Stevens, our Vice President for Human Capital Services, is going to explain in more detail the administrative furlough process itself.
Thanks, Chuck. Good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to run through the timeline as far as planning and how we did this. We obviously have a furlough policy that we have to follow. So June 8th, we sent guidance to the deans, vice presidents, and faculty. We also, faculty senate, USS Senate, around administrative furloughs and what our guidance for those would be. Between that time and June 22nd, the colleges and units determined whether or not they needed to use administrative furloughs as part of their budget planning process. And then they held consultations with Human Capital Services around what administrative furloughs would look like. We answered their questions, and they developed plans and submitted those to us as well as the provost. We then reviewed those. The Office of General Counsel reviewed those as well, just to make sure that we had everything according to policy. We weren't impacting one group of people over another group of people, that sort of thing. July 1st, we took all of those plans and compiled them into a single plan and shared those with Faculty Senate and USS Senate leadership and F-Scoop as well. So we went through that process in consultation with shared governance, had them, give us suggestions, ask questions. July 6th, we had a consultation with those councils. And we had the president, the provost, myself, went through that. And obviously today, July 10th, we're having this town hall to formally announce employees being notified on their furloughs. And as well, employees who are being furloughed will be notified by their departments and units today. And then the earliest day those could begin would be August 9th. So we have to give 30 days notice under the policy. So that's where we are with there. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So 7 colleges and units are using administrative furlough as part of their overall budget reduction plans. Estimated 5.9 million in targeted salary costs. The reductions are going to impact 1,438 faculty and staff, representing 1,404 FTE. And these are the colleges and units where that's going to occur. So we have agriculture and cooperative extension, architecture, planning and design, arts and sciences, health and human sciences, communications and marketing, Office of International Programs, and Office of the President. And you can see on the chart the savings that will be generated by those administrative furloughs, as well as the impacted FTE. Next slide, please. So each of the colleges and units use those salary tiers and determined how many employees would fall into those tiers. It varies by the needs of the colleges and units. Again, the effective dates, they can begin on August 9th and extend through the end of fiscal year 21. Those will be outlined in the plans. The dean or vice president determine timing and dates for furloughs based on unit needs. And the details for each unit are going to be in their plans. There are some employee exemptions. I know that was one of the questions somebody asked. In the plan, there are some employee exemptions in those plans. There are some positions, classes, organizational units, or organizational areas that may be exempted. They're clearly documented in the plan. Some of those exemptions are automatic. Some are determined by the need of the college or unit. Okay, let's go to the next one, please. So some of the exemptions that are automatic are the employees on H-1B and E-3 visas. Those employees cannot be furloughed under the rules of their visas. We're not going to have any administrative furlough for temporary employees, none of our graduate students, student employees, nor employees on sabbatical leave. Additional exemptions in the plans may include, but are not limited to, employees who've been on emergency furlough, those who are already taking voluntary salary reductions in some grant-funded positions, and those who have received terminal contracts or have not been issued new term contracts. So those are, again, some of the automatic exemptions, some of the exemptions that were available. Okay, next slide, please. So details about all the administrative furlough plans, we'll be posting those on the HCS website. So immediately following this, you can go to our website and you can take a look at the overall combined university plan, as well as all the unit plans. And the colleges and units will be notifying employees today who will be furloughed as part of these plans. And notifications will explain how the furlough is going to apply to each employee's position. We're also going to have up there some supervisor guidance. We'll have training on recording furlough time and frequently asked questions about both administrative and emergency furloughs. We would ask that before you come to us with questions that you review all that information first. Take a look at it, read the guidance, go through the training about recording furlough time, read the frequently asked questions, and then if you do still have questions after reviewing that, you can contact us. The contact information is listed here, hr@ksu.edu, and any benefits related questions, benefits@ksu.edu. So be happy to answer questions once everybody's gone through that material and still have questions. Okay, next, I think. Okay. And I'm going to hand it over to the president to summarize.
Well, as we said, and I think everybody said that this is really unprecedented territory. I've been around a long time. I've seen lots of different things, but never this combination of things. And it's going to make it for, it's going to make a very interesting fiscal year 21. If you think about what the state's going through and their tax revenues, just about the time they get a little money in the kitty at state level, they get hit by probably over $1 billion less tax revenue than they're planning on, and they have to have a balanced budget. So we don't know the impact of state actions yet, totally. Well, for sure, we don't know them for the rest of the fiscal year, but they'll probably be dramatic as well. And we're not the only state. This is across the country. So if you're a public university and rely to some degree on state funds, there's going to be some impact. This effort we're taking right now is just short of $9 million in cost reductions. It does impact the lives of 1,868 employees. As university president, this is something I thought, wished I'd never have to do because of the impact it has on individual lives. And we have a lot of employees in the lower two brackets, particularly the lower bracket below $50,000 a year, which means they're probably barely getting by in any case or having difficulty getting by. And so everybody that's been working on this thinks about this all the time. This is our family, and we're impacting lives. But we go back to our guiding principles, and we've got to keep our university financially solvent. We know these actions come at a cost, and we know there's, this wouldn't be put in the category of morale booster, it'd be in the other category. So that will probably impact productivity and services. We're not going to have as many people that can help deliver our land grant mission. And then we won't ignore the real life consequences to our faculty and staff. And other things we are doing, we are trying to mitigate that the best we can do. I would talk about the KState fund again, that should help those in the lower income bracket to some degree, hopefully, if we can keep, we're still fundraising for that actively. And then things like the Child Development Center, Child Care Center, looking at plans on how we could reopen those and provide child care for faculty and staff. Those are all things that we know are really important to all of us. And so we're trying to, where we can, make life as easy as possible, given the fact that we've had to take impact almost 2,000 employees' salaries. We've had a lot of difficult decisions from the beginning of this. We've always said we are all in this together. So my salary's been impacted. Everybody, I think all the senior administrators have already taken salary cuts. We will continue to take care of ourselves, our families, our students, colleagues, also our communities. We have a great community in Manhattan. They are with us in this COVID-19 fight, very strongly with us. And that's going to be important as we go here in about a month or so and students start coming back together. Despite the fact this is unprecedented, we're going to get through this challenging year. There have been other challenging years, the Spanish flu, the world wars, the 60s. I mean, there are times when it looks really, really bleak, but it always ends, and we always get through the challenging year together. And I think some of the decisions that unit leaders are making some of those will be important as we go forward to make us even more efficient. So I'll just leave it there. We know this is difficult, but we are a great university. Think about the 3,300 folks who virtually walked across the stage this last spring, thanks to all of you. No small feat. Changed the lives of 3,300 folks, which will change, of course, our communities that they go live in, because they're better thinkers, better prepared for economic progress. So we have a great mission. We're proud of that mission. You should be proud of that mission. And we'll stand for questions.
There was a question that came into the chat while I was talking that I just want to quickly address, and that was about whether the numbers I presented were net of federal CARES Act aid, and they did not include the federal CARES Act aid. So we received some aid, certainly not enough to cover those numbers that I talked about, but some CARES Act aid was received.
And I'll address one that came up that I'm probably best prepared to do. That's could we stop the upgrade to Bill Snyder Family Stadium, the South End Zone project, and then turn that donor money to support faculty and staff. And a couple of problems with that. One is that we have a contract for that. So if we were to stop, that would be a breach of contract and we'd have to renegotiate. And that would be very, very expensive for an athletic department that is at KState is always on a thin line. Our athletic department budget in the Big 12 is always 8 or 9, right at the bottom of the conference. And as you know, they get no money from tuition. They get no money from the university. They have to be self-supporting. And so that would be, that's not practical and it would be expensive. And second, donors get to choose where they put their money. If Chuck and I know, because we get to talk to the foundation on a monthly basis, but many of the donors that are supporting that project also support the K-State Strong Fund. So they're not mutually exclusive. And we're, as I think we said earlier on, we're still fundraising for that fund.
So looking through the questions that have appeared on the chat, there was a question about whether folks in athletics are being furloughed. The answer there is as is the case across many of our units, we have different employment structures in different units. In athletics, most of those employees are term employees, and they received reduced salaries. So rather than furloughs, they had reduced salaries.
There's one here about, so central administration is exempt from furloughs. Well, the president's office not. That's the way we're balancing our budget. So every person in that office will have furlough days.
And in addition,
I think
go ahead.
Go ahead, Chuck. I was going to say, I think the larger answer to that as well is that every unit in the university took budget cuts and had different mechanisms to address those cuts, whether those were furloughs or whether those were position eliminations, whether those were layoffs, whether those were cuts to operating expenses, and they all had to hit the same targets in terms of what their budget cuts were going to be. I mean, speaking for myself, from HCS, we eliminated a number of vacant positions that were pretty critical to us that we're no longer going to have. And we cut some operating expense as well.
And I was just going to add to the president's comment that some of the other units in central administration did emergency furloughs, if you recall the distinction that I said earlier. And so some of the larger actions that happened early happened in those units with emergency furloughs.
I think there's a question here about increased operating costs since March. How did that happen since most staff and we're working remotely? I'll start and then Chuck can fill in where I miss it. But well, first of all, we had to start as we pivoted to online where we could. There were some technology things that we had to do and some provision of that increased our cost. You know, of course, we had the refunds in housing and dining. That was almost, I think, Ethan, about $8 million that we had to give back to students for housing and dining for the last half of that semester. And then trying to prepare for FY21 and in-person classes, trying to buy the supplies necessary to make that happen. So there were increased costs. And Ethan, you might talk about what some of those are, if you would, please.
Sure. So some units had to, when we eliminated some of our student workers, they were required to bring back employees to do some of those tasks. So some of our animal care areas were brought back to, which created an increased salary cost. Units also had to procure some additional equipment, like you mentioned earlier, to allow employees to work remotely. So there was a wide variety of actions that were required across the university.
So Ethan, while you're up, I don't know if you want us to say there was a question here about renegotiating or pausing debt payments.
Yeah, so we are actively monitoring our entire debt portfolio for the opportunity to refinance and achieve hopefully lower payments. We are wanting to, we're watching the market to make sure that we capture it at the right time. It's been a fairly unstable market right now, and so we're going to continue to watch that throughout the fiscal year to see how we can leverage it at the right time.
So there was also a question in the chat about the numbers. So as I had reported earlier, we've lost about $48 million so far, and this plan, the furlough plan, will save about $8.65 million. So the question was, what's the difference? And the difference is in all the other levers that I reported very quickly in that earlier table. Some of those levers, one of them was over $10 million. I think that was the elimination of vacant positions. So it's other levers that are making up that difference.
I'd like to answer the question that I know that somebody posed. I want to say it was Brian Linshield who posed earlier, and several others, about the question of why whole furlough days rather than tracking hours. Just kind of wanted to answer that question. There are several reasons for that. One is administratively it'd be extraordinarily difficult to track the hours and ensure that everybody's taken the furlough time that they need to take. It also ensures that employees do not do any work at all during a furlough period. So when they're on furlough, they're not doing any work at all. This is the best guidance around the Fair Labor Standards Act and the issues we have with furloughing employees, particularly employees who are exempt. If we have people who are working, not reporting hours, that could be a pretty big, significant liability for the university.
I'll answer two questions. One is, has KState considered an early retirement buyout along the lines of what KU is doing? Absolutely, that we considered it. The problem is, in the short term, it costs the university money. In the long term, it saves you money. In the short term, we have a really serious budget problem. So that is something that will be looked at downstream, but not immediately. And the other one's on the president's office. Yeah, we're the lowest, I think, in budget or savings of $6,000. Maybe most people don't know we have a really small office. Most of the employees are in the lower brackets of salary, and it doesn't include the 10% reduction to my salary, because the Board of Regents wouldn't allow us to cut that salary. So I took my cut and I donated it. Actually, I donated it to the Foundation for the KState Strong Fund. It was just shy. It was $49,900 and some dollars that I just gave to the foundation. So, but we're a very small office. It's a handful of people.
So there are a number of questions in the chat about whether or not we considered taking a university-wide furlough approach, and we certainly did consider that. We looked at pros and cons. One of these questions, for example, in the chat asks about whether we looked at that approach in order to even out needs. But the fact is, as I said earlier, that the needs are different across our units. There's really not a way to do this that's going to satisfy all of the things we would like to be able to address. And really, when you think about a unit that may have chosen to eliminate positions and therefore avoided a furlough within those units, that's a decision that was made at that unit level. If a decision was made to sweep cash balances out of accounts, that decision was made at that unit level. And I think all of the unit leaders made every effort to protect their employees as best they can. The furlough option is painful. I've been furloughed 3 times in my career, and I know I didn't like it. None of us like this, but the furlough option is one of the options among a variety that are being taken all at the same time across the university. President Myers, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Sorry. If you see a question that applies, you can answer. Go ahead and do it. As I scroll down, I'm trying to keep up with the chat part. There's some there, Jay. Maybe you could.
Yeah, I'm trying to work through them. So one of the questions was, can you take furloughs on holidays? We can't take them on any paid state holidays. So if there's a paid state holiday that's one of our official holidays, we can't take furloughs on those. As far as part-time employees, if a part-time employee is on furlough, their furlough days will be equivalent to their part-time hours. So if their part-time hours was 4 hours, that's their furlough day. If their part-time hours are 5 hours, that's their furlough day. There's one about vice presidents of the general university units in college is not included. So all of the vice presidents, all of the deans are taking a voluntary salary reduction rather than a furlough. And to Chuck's point earlier, in terms of need, all those other units are reducing their budgets as everyone else is. So they just use different levers to balance their budget rather than furlough.
There've been several questions about whether athletics is included in the figures that I presented, and they are in the $48 million figure. Athletics was included in that figure. So there's a question about how many new provost positions have been added. I can't go back 5 years. I don't know that, but I can tell you that in the 2 years I've been here, the answer is none. There have been no new positions added in the provost office.
I would just say Provost Tabor's done a really good job of, as we implemented our new strategic enrollment management plan, we've hired several people to do that, but they all came into vacant positions. So, and I can tell you for the president's office, there's been, since I've been here a little over 4 years now, there have been no additions to the office. There's been decrements. We're probably down 5 people in the office. So it's not at all like the office that I was familiar with when I would visit John Weefall or Kirk Schultz. It's lean and hopefully somewhat effective.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing from my perspective. So HCS, in the 3 years I've been here, by the time these budget cuts are complete this year, we'll have 20% less staff than when I started.
So there's a question that's specifically about the lack of furloughs in business, vet med, and engineering. It's really the same answer that I've already given. Vet med, business, and engineering pulled other levers. They did other things in order to close their budget gaps.
So a question about employees who are furloughed, can they file for unemployment? Yes, they can. Whether or not they'll be eligible for unemployment will be determined by the unemployment office. They do individual determinations. I couldn't tell you whether people would or would not. I will say that people who are furloughed for a longer period of time have a greater chance for qualifying for unemployment than those who are taking a day here and there, just based on income levels.
There's a question about how to manage furlough days if you teach 5 days a week. I mean, I mentioned that I've been furloughed 3 times, and I was a professor teaching 5 days a week when that happened, and it's not easy. You know, what I think we were asked to do, what I did was I took my furlough days on weekends. On vacation period times. I scheduled them at times when I was able to do it without impacting my classes as best I could. So there is an option to take a percentage pay cut rather than a furlough day. I think the critical issues there are the taking a percentage pay cut is a way that it may be easier to manage your time in terms of some of the things we were talking about, teaching and things like that. But at the same time, it also means that you're not receiving the compensation of having days off. That is, the furlough days are days when you're not expected, in fact, not allowed to work. And so that's a critical thing to consider in thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think so on our website, we'll have some information about that in our frequently asked questions, as well as in the, there's a training you can run through about recording time, and we'll talk a little bit about voluntary salary reduction. Now, in the letters that employees receive for those who are going to be on administrative furlough, in the letter you receive, there'll be some instructions about a voluntary salary reduction if you choose to do that. And that will only be available for FLSA exempt employees. So if you're an exempt employee, you have the option of doing that. It's completely voluntary. There'll be instructions about that in the letter that you receive if you choose to do that. The reduction will be equal to the amount of the furlough days. So whatever those furlough days in your case are worth, whatever that dollar amount is, that would be the voluntary salary reduction. If you choose to do that, again, there'll be instructions in the letter. It would take you to, there's a place on our website where we'll have, it's a Qualtrics survey where you can indicate, yeah, I want to do a voluntary salary reduction if you so choose to do so. It would then generate a note to your department who would create a contract addendum that you would then sign, and you would take a voluntary salary reduction spread out across the fiscal year. So that is an option for people. It's again, completely voluntary if that's what you choose to do, rather than taking furlough. So it will be there for you.
And just to add, there's a question about whether folks who take a voluntary salary reduction, whether that would affect your eligibility for KState strong funds, and it would not. And there's a question about whether it would affect unemployment. Jay, would it affect unemployment eligibility?
It would affect unemployment because you're taking a voluntary reduction. Unemployment eligibility hinges on you having something involuntary happen to you. And in terms of KState strong funds, we're still working out on what that would look like in terms of administrative furlough. There's a limited amount of funding in there so far, and we've given out quite a bit to our folks who are on emergency furlough. So we'll have to determine what that would look like, but we're still working that out.
I think the K-State family, I'll predict they'll respond well to the request for more funding for that, because they have a lot of sympathy and compassion for those that, especially in the lower bracket, salary bracket, of the hardship that this is going to create potentially for them. So I'm confident we'll continue to raise money for that. And there was go ahead.
No, please finish.
I was, why were we caught completely off guard by this? I guess meaning the pandemic. And yeah, we're guilty. We didn't have a, pandemic hits plan on the shelf. So and that's part of the problem. And you can see the whole country did not have a plan. As a nation, we should have been prepared. This is something we've been thinking about, at least in the military, for decades. But you never know. Every situation is different. So whatever kind of plan you would have for this would immediately have to be changed to adapt to the conditions that you're facing at the time. And so I think I'm really proud of how this university responded to this pandemic. We were one of the leaders in asking students not to come back to campus. I think that saved lots of lives. I think it saved lots of stress on our medical facilities in Manhattan, Kansas, and Topeka, for that matter, where many people would probably have to have gone. So I think we adapted very well, very quickly. And this is unprecedented. So we're in uncharted waters as we go forward with not only a disease would be one thing you could handle, but it has a tremendous economic impact across the country as well. What's the unemployment rate today? 10, 12%, whatever. We started this whole thing when it was below 4% nationally. So this is unprecedented. And then you put other issues on top of that. I think we have, as a university, done a fairly good job of planning for the future here. And this just has to be one of the steps. There's just, if you want to stay solvent, pay our bills, and continue to teach and do our research and provide the outreach, we have to take these kind of measures as hurtful as they can be sometimes.
So there are some concerns expressed in these questions about productivity and lost productivity and the impact that they may have on promotion and tenure, the impact that they may have on evaluations, et cetera, going forward. When we talk through this plan with shared governance bodies, with Faculty Senate in particular, we committed then that we would do some of the same things that we did in the spring. So we will have, for example, guidance to supervisors about evaluations during this period, things along those lines.
Jay, you mentioned the voluntary pay cuts, and the second part of the question that I try to answer, if employees take a voluntary pay cut, can those count as charitable contributions and be donated to the foundation? And I don't think so. I think those have to count towards the unit's budget savings.
Correct. Yeah, if you're identified for a furlough and you took a voluntary salary reduction in lieu of taking the furlough, that money still needs to go to cover that budget target.
So I want to make a general comment that some of you are not getting your questions answered. And the truth is they're coming in so fast. I don't know about Jay and the president, but I'm not even able to track all the questions as they're appearing. So I'm answering them as quickly as I'm able. There's a question here about why are furloughs not being introduced marginally like tax brackets? That's actually how they are being. So if you look at the salary tiers, the furloughs are introduced at different levels for each salary tier.
This one here, why are furloughs not being introduced marginally like tax brackets? Chuck, I think you almost.
Yeah, that's the one I just answered.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Can we use other funds to buy out furloughs for faculty or staff? I believe the answer to that is yes, depending upon the nature of those funds. Correct, Jay? Sorry, I caught you getting a drink of coffee.
All right. My coffee is actually Coke Zero, but yeah, I mean, as far as the funding goes, the colleges just, again, they need to hit their targets. From my perspective in HCS, where the funds come from in terms of that is not a question for me, but I think, it's between their budget officer and them hitting that target.
Yeah, so just to elaborate a little bit, there are some requirements that have to be met. This is listed in the guidance document that we're putting out. So again, there's a lot more detail that's going to be released after this meeting than we're able to do during this town hall. So really look for a lot of these more detailed questions in there. There have been quite a few questions about the future, and I'm going to try to answer, but I'm going to start my answer by saying the obvious, which is that I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know, what the future is going to hold in terms of our funding situation. But if conditions worsened, then yes, we would have to take some. The university would have no choice but to continue to take difficult actions in that kind of an environment. As you know, we are doing everything that we can not to do that. We expect that our enrollment will pick up. That will be a major factor. We don't know what the state's going to do. But the bottom line is that the university's budget does have to balance at the end of the day.
I would just say our pre-COVID enrollment estimate was encouraging, that some of the steps we've taken in our SEM plan were working. Post-COVID, things change, of course, so we'll be down. But going forward, as Chuck said, we're optimistic we can be up. Some of the things we're going to do in our SEM plan actually don't take effect till next fall, not this fall. So we feel pretty good about that. We think we can improve our enrollment in meaningful ways going forward. But the rest of it, you're right. Whoever asked the question, this is not a one-year deal, and so we don't know going forward. We have no idea. We're not alone. Every public university in the nation is facing the same thing, and some privates, and some universities have already gone out of business. And that's the uncertainty. There's a big bubble of uncertainty around all of this, and a lot of ambiguity, and it's really difficult to navigate those waters. But I'm proud of what our team has done to do the best we can to neck it down the best we can and make decisions based on the data we have.
So there've been quite a few questions about the exact number of days for each tier. That will be released in the unit plans as they come out. It's just too much detail for us to do that here. But again, that's going to be posted right after this. We also, if there are questions related to your particular unit and they're not answered, or you still have further questions after looking at the information that we release, please talk to your unit heads and your deans.
So while
Do you want to?
Go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to ask Chuck, do you want to address? There's a lot of questions in there about evaluation, faculty evaluation, tenure, promotion. How does this impact that? Maybe if you want to address those.
Yeah, I maybe went too quickly earlier. So I did say that we intend to continue to redo some of the things that we did in the spring to acknowledge that productivity is being lost at this time. So for example, we will put out specific guidance about evaluations. We'll put out specific guidance about productivity, and we do intend to revisit with KBOR the issue of tenure clocks, which we talked about, but this is not something that's wholly in our control. So I can't just tell you we will do that, but that's something that we're going to revisit what we did before. So I fully acknowledge that faculty productivity will be lost, and that will particularly impact tenure track faculty. So we will look at that. Other employees are also affected in terms of their productivity. And so it's important to understand that this guidance on evaluations is going to be for staff, for faculty. It's across the board that we need to have some grace again during this time for our employees whose productivity will be impacted by this.
Yeah, and we're going to have a communication coming out pretty quickly from HCS around staff evaluations and some flexibility there. So that'll be coming as well.
Still reading through some of the, I'll just mention while people are reading through the chat for questions to be answered. There is work going on right now with the county and with the state applying for what they call spark funding. And there are some limitations what we can ask for what we can use that money for, but the numbers are pretty large. And that funding, either from the state or from the county, is essential as we open campus this fall, because a lot of it has to do with opening the campus safely. So So testing, PPE, the kind of things we're trying to do to make signage and all that, and technology, and perhaps some student financial relief as well, are in numbers that are fairly large. And all the universities, Regent universities applied to Board of Regents, and the Board of Regents have put a letter forward to the committee that's working that. And then we've done similar things to the county, a little reduced scope, but the same basic idea. So on the horizon, because it's going to be expensive to open campus safely, and we're going to need those funds to do it. So that's kind of on the bright side, I think, although we haven't got the funding yet.
There have been several questions about whether we would consider lowering our tuition in order to drive enrollment. We have considered tuition actions for this, and one of the actions we've taken is not to increase it. And we're only one of 2 Kansas universities that took that action, not to increase our tuition this fall. At this time, we're not going to lower our tuition, but it is certainly something that we've talked about in strategic enrollment management. So the question that's come up several times about the College of Ag KSRE furloughs, which are higher than other units or colleges. Again, this is being driven by the funding source, by the magnitude of hit to the units. It's all of that is having an impact on the College of Ag as well. And so the decision they've made is to do this furlough. Also, the nature of work in KSRE and Ag, it just was harder for them to close the budget gap with some of the other levers. So one can work on research and get paid from research funding during a furlough, yes.
So there's been a lot of time, excuse me, there's been a lot of time spent in developing FAQs for this. And I think a lot of these details you'll see when the plan is published, and will be on our website. So I think a lot of this can be answered probably if you have additional questions, can be answered there. If not, I'd suggest you talk to your unit leaders or others you think might have the answer, but the units are responsible for, they have the authority and the responsibility for developing this particular plan. And that's where you should start with your questions. Hopefully they've helped provide some of the thought about this beforehand, but in some cases, I know they haven't in all cases or as thoroughly as you would need. But that's where you have to go for the answers. But any of us are going to help with this. But we have a good set of FAQs, and that will be on the website. So does anybody want to answer any more questions that are in the chat at this time? Are there any things there that?
I think I answered in the chat, but it's, there was a question came up several times about the budget cuts being uniform across the units and colleges. And yes, the budget cuts were applied uniformly. So all of the colleges, the cuts to their budgets were applied according to the formulas in the budget model, and the administrative units, correct me if I'm wrong, were 8.4%.
Yep. Well, excuse me, I had to cough. I think this probably wraps it up for this session. We appreciate everybody attending. We appreciate your questions. I appreciate the panelists, Provost Tabor, Jay Stevens at HCS, Human Capital Services, Ethan Erickson, our CFO, and others that have joined in and helped answer these questions. Cindy Hollingsworth from Communications and Marketing has been working the chat piece and sending us messages when we don't do something right. So Cindy, thank you for orchestrating this and all the people behind the scenes that have made this town hall possible from an IT standpoint. We thank you very much. And particularly for our faculty and staff, we thank you. This is not an easy message to deliver, right? This is really tough. This involves all of our salaries. And we're all in this together. There's nobody untouched that I know of in this pandemic and economic and financial situation that the country's in. Maybe there's some, but certainly nobody I know on campus that has been untouched by this. And I think what you see is an attempt, our attempt to do this as fairly as we possibly can. And for those in the lowest salary bracket, for sure, try to find a mechanism to help a little bit through philanthropy. So we'll keep working those things that mean a lot to you, like child development, child care, as we look forward to opening up this fall, and do all we can to make our productivity here at Kansas State University the best it can be. And I just remind you, this is a very noble profession. It's going through some real stress right now. People care. The Association of Public and Land Grant Universities is working every one of these issues we talked about today. The Congress is involved. So I'm not sure how much help we're going to get in the future from the federal government, but I think there'll be some realizations. They realize the impact that particularly public research universities like Kansas State University, big public research universities, have on our economic development. So hopefully there'll be some help in the future to mitigate at least parts of this. But in the meantime, we've got to make these hard choices and then move forward. So let's move forward together. We've got less than a month before students start arriving. We've got a lot of work to do before then to make sure that their experience, which is the reason we exist, that their experience is the best we can possibly make it be. And I thank you all for all you do every day, all the hard work you put into making K-State the great university it is. So thank you very much for being on our town hall.